Welcome to Scandal and Silk Tailies, where secrets unravel and the forbidden becomes irresistible. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest hot stories. It started on a Thursday evening in late October when the air outside felt crisp and smelled faintly of wood smoke. I'd been curled up on the couch in my living room, the television flickering in the background, when my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. From Hector, my husband's best friend since college. Are you home? I need to talk to you privately. Hector wasn't the type to send cryptic texts. Normally his messages were short, practical, and almost always about my husband Michael, coordinating game nights, sharing football updates, or planning surprise birthdays. But something about this one felt different. There was no emoji, no humor, just that quiet urgency that instantly set my heart racing. I replied hesitantly, "Yes, Michael's working late." "What's wrong?" 5 minutes later, headlights swept across my driveway. I pulled my cardigan tighter and opened the door before he even knocked. He stood there in a dark jacket, his eyes restless. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside, still confused, and he walked in without removing his coat, his energy too tense for small talk. "Hector, you're scaring me," I said softly, closing the door. "What happened?" He turned toward me, and that was the moment. I noticed his hands trembling slightly. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. "I wasn't sure if I should even show you this," he said. "But you need to know the truth about Michael." My breath caught. The air felt heavier. "What? Truth?" He hesitated before plugging the drive into my laptop on the kitchen counter. A folder popped open, revealing a series of video files and screenshots. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to see, but my eyes were already drawn to the dates and timestamps. The first file opened. And there he was, Michael, in a dimly lit restaurant I didn't recognize. He wasn't alone. A woman with dark hair sat across from him, leaning in too close, touching his wrist as they laughed out at first. I told myself it could be a colleague, a friend, anything harmless. But then the next video loaded. This time they were in a hotel lobby. His hand was on her back. She kissed him quickly, and he didn't pull away, daunted by the third file. There was no room left for denial. I stepped back. From the counter, my hand over my mouth. My pulse was roaring in my ears. How did you get this?" Hector's voice was low. "I didn't go looking for it. A friend of mine works at that hotel. She saw Michael and thought I should know. I debated for weeks whether to say anything, but I couldn't keep it from you. I wanted to cry, to scream, to break something, but I just stood there, cold and silent." Hector reached out, touching my arm gently. "I'm sorry, Anna, I know this hurts." Something about the way he said my name, not rushed, not pitying, just steady, made me meet his eyes. I realized how close we were standing, how his fingers lingered for just a second too long. We stayed like that, the air between us thick with the weight of betrayal and something else entirely, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered, but he didn't move away. "You shouldn't have had to be the one to tell me," I whispered back. That night would change everything, not just how I saw my husband, but how I saw Hector. And I wasn't ready for what came next. Hector didn't leave right away. He stood in my kitchen as though afraid to let me process this alone, but also as though he knew the longer he stayed, the more complicated this would become. I closed the laptop with a soft click. The images still burned into my mind. "How long do you think it's been going on?" I asked Dot. He hesitated. "From what I could piece together, months, maybe longer." My stomach turned. I thought about the late nights Michael had been finishing reports, at work, the sudden business, trips, the faint smell of perfume that I dismissed as my imagination. "God," I whispered, leaning against the counter. "I'm such an idiot." Hector shook his head firmly. "No, you trusted him. That's not stupidity, that's love. It's on him, not you." Something in the way he said it broke me. No one had spoken to me like that in a long time, without judgment, without frustration. Michael's voice lately had been cold, distracted, like I was an obligation. Hector's was warm, deliberate, grounding. I blinked back tears. Why did you even care enough to tell me? For a second, his gaze flickered, almost as if there was more he wanted to say but couldn't. Because you deserve to know the truth. I couldn't stand by and watch him treat you like this. The room felt smaller, the distance between us almost non-existent. I could smell the faint cologne on his jacket. My fingers gripped the edge of the counter just to keep my balance. You should probably go, I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. He nodded but didn't move. Anna, if you need someone to talk to, you know where I am, day or night. The way he looked at me when he said it, steady, searching, felt like something I shouldn't let myself notice. But I did. And when he finally left, the house felt both emptier and more charged than it had minutes earlier. That night, I couldn't sleep. The shadows in the room felt heavier, like the darkness itself was aware of what I now knew. Michael's side of the bed was cold and untouched. He texted earlier saying he'd be staying at the office. Late again, I stared at my phone, scrolling back to Hector's last message. Day or night, I typed, "Are you still awake?" The reply came instantly. "Yeah, you okay?" I told myself I just wanted to talk about Michael, to make sense of everything. But when Hector showed up 20 minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee despite it being midnight, I realized I'd been lying to myself. We sat in the living room, the only light coming from the lamp in the corner. He listened as I spilled. Everything, the doubts I'd buried, the excuses I'd made for Michael, the way I'd been shrinking inside my own marriage. At one point, my voice broke. Hector reached across the couch and took my hand. His thumb brushed over my skin in slow, careful circles, and it felt like a lifeline. "Anna, you're worth so much more than this," he murmured. I didn't know who moved first, but suddenly we were closer, our knees touching. I could feel the warmth radiating off him. His hands stayed in mine, but now his other hand rested lightly on my arm, almost protective. We didn't cross the line that night, but something shifted, something irreversible. The next few days blurred. Together, Michael remained distant, oblivious to the fact that I knew. Hector checked in constantly, sometimes with short texts, sometimes calling just to hear my voice. I told myself it was friendship, but deep down I felt the tension building, the pull that made me replay his words. His touch, over and over. One evening, rain lashed against the windows as a storm rolled in. Michael was gone again. I sat by the kitchen counter, aimlessly staring at the dark street outside. A car pulled up. It was Hector. No warning, no text, just him stepping into the doorway with rain dripping from his hair. "I was nearby," he said, his voice low. "I just needed to see you." The sound of the storm outside made the house feel cocooned, cut off from the rest of the world. He shrugged off his jacket, his shirt damp against his skin. I don't know if it was the storm, or the ache in my chest, or the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. But when he stepped closer, I didn't move away. "Anna," he whispered, searching my face, "I don't want to be just the person who tells you bad news. I want to be the one who makes you feel alive again." My breath caught. That was the moment I knew the choice was mine, and it would change everything. The silence between us in the kitchen wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Heavy with things we weren't saying, things we were both thinking but afraid to admit. Aloud, Hector's eyes searched mine, as if he was waiting for permission to close the last few inches between us. I stepped back, just lightly, though not because I wanted distance. If anything, I needed space to breathe, to think. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Why now?" I asked quietly. His brows drew together. "What do you mean? You've known about Michael for a while. You could have told me sooner. Why tonight?" He hesitated, glancing away for a moment before answering. "Because tonight, I couldn't stand the thought of you being alone, hurting. And Maybe I couldn't stand the thought of him still having you, even after what he's done. His voice cracked just enough on the last words that it undid something in me. I turned away, pretending to fuss with the coffee cups he brought, but really it was so I didn't have to let him see the heat rising in my face. The rain was relentless outside, tapping against the windows in uneven rhythms. The sound seemed to swallow the room, muting everything else. Hector took a step closer, then another, until I could feel the faint warmth radiating off him. I didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid of what might happen if I did. "You deserve someone who actually shows up for you," he said, voice low but steady. "Not someone who leaves you wondering where you stand every day." My chest tightened. I knew he wasn't just talking about Michael anymore. He was talking about himself. Days that followed blurred into something strange, a quiet but undeniable shift in my world. Michael kept his distance, too caught up in work to notice how much I was pulling away. I stopped asking when he'd be home. I stopped pretending to believe the excuses. Hector, on the other hand, seemed to become more present. Little things. At first, a text in the morning, a quick stop by to drop off something he thought I'd like, calls at night just to say he was thinking about me. It was dangerous. I knew it. But it was also intoxicating. We started spending more time together, under the guise of just talking. He'd sit with me in the living room, his arm draped along the back of the couch, close enough that his fingertips could almost brush my shoulder. Sometimes our hands would touch, accidentally at first, then less so. Every glance lasted a second too long. Every word felt charged. One Friday night, Michael called to say he'd be in another city for the weekend. He didn't ask what my plans were. Didn't care. I sat in my kitchen for a while after hanging up, staring at my phone. My thumb hovered over Hector's name. It's just coffee, I told myself. We've done that before, but deep down, I knew tonight wouldn't be like before. When Hector arrived, the storm outside was louder than the last time he'd been here. He shook the rain from his hair, smiling faintly as he stepped inside. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. "Michael's gone for the weekend," I said without thinking, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. We moved to the couch, but this time there was no space between us. His arm brushed against mine, his knee resting lightly against my leg. We talked at first about nothing and everything, but the words started to fade, replaced by the kind of silence that demanded something more. At one point, I turned to look at him, and he was already looking at me. His gaze was steady, his jaw tense, as though he was holding back. "Hector," I whispered, not even sure what I was going to say next. He leaned in just enough that I could feel his breath against my skin. "You know, I won't touch you unless you ask me to," he murmured. The words were like a key in a lock. My pulse raced, my hands trembling as I reached for him, not out of weakness, but out of something I'd been denying for too long. I didn't answer him right away. My mind was tangled, looping through memories of Michael's absences, his dismissive tone, the way our marriage had become something I barely recognized. At the same time, Hector's words, "I won't touch you unless you ask me to," pulsed. In my head, like a challenge and a promise, all at once. My breath slowed. The room felt warmer, though the rain was still rattling hard against the windows. His eyes stayed locked on mine, unwavering, as if he could read every thought I wasn't saying. "Hector." My voice cracked slightly. "What happens if I do ask?" Something shifted in his expression, not a smile exactly, but the tension in. His face eased, his jaw relaxing as if he'd been holding it clenched for hours. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned back slightly, giving me space, as if to say, "This choice is yours." I stared down at my hands. I could feel the weight of what I was about to do, not just the betrayal of Michael, but the acknowledgement of how far I'd already crossed that invisible line. I'm so tired of feeling like I'm waiting for something that will never come. I finally whispered. Hector's voice was deep and steady. "Then stop waiting." The air between us thickened. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I didn't remember leaning toward him. But suddenly we were close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his aftershave mixed with rainwater. My hand found his, tentative at first, and instead of pulling away, he laced his fingers. Through mine, it felt right. Terrifying, but right. We sat like that for what felt like forever, the storm outside wrapping the house in sound. He didn't rush me, didn't push. He simply stayed there, warm and steady, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of my hand in slow, rhythmic motions. The next day should have been awkward, but it wasn't. I woke up with this strange clarity. A realization that for the first time in years, I wasn't replaying Michael's words in my head, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Instead, I was replaying Hector's voice, the way it had sounded when he told me to stop waiting over the next week. I found myself inventing reasons to see him. A missing grocery item. Help with the stubborn latch on my kitchen window. Checking on a package that hadn't arrived. They were all excuses, and we both knew it. Every time we were together, the space between us seemed to shrink. We would stand in the kitchen talking, our shoulders brushing. In the living room, we'd end up sitting so close our knees touched without either of us moving away. It was like walking toward the edge of a cliff, each step deliberate, knowing exactly what lay ahead, and still taking it anyway. One night, it finally happened. Michael was gone again, another overnight trip for clients. The rain had returned, softer this time, a steady patter on the roof. I texted Hector without thinking too much about it. Come over. I need you. When he arrived, neither of us bothered with small talk. We just looked at each other, really looked, and all the restraint we'd been holding on to for weeks dissolved. It wasn't rushed. If anything, it was the opposite. Every movement was deliberate. Every touch asking a silent question and receiving an unspoken answer. It felt like the kind of connection I'd been starved for, not just physical, but something deeper, rawer, more alive. By the time the night was over, I knew there was no going back. I couldn't unfeel what I felt for him. I couldn't pretend that Michael was still the man I wanted to go home to in the days that followed. Hector didn't pressure me to make decisions. He didn't tell me to leave Michael or confess anything. He just kept showing up, in texts and unexpected visits, in the quiet ways that made me feel seen. But underneath it all, I knew something was coming. Michael wasn't stupid, and if I kept drifting further away, he would notice. The question wasn't if this would all come to light. It was when, the night after he came over, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every little thing, the way his eyes softened when they met mine, the way his hand lingered just a fraction longer than it needed to, played on a loop in my mind. It wasn't just attraction. It was that dangerous, intoxicating pull that made everything else seem faded by comparison. I kept telling myself it was wrong, that I should shut the door before it went too far. But every time Hector was near, I found myself opening it wider instead. 3 days later, it happened again. It was late, and the lights in the neighborhood had all gone dark except for mine. I'd been pacing in my kitchen, the clock ticking far too loudly, when I saw him outside through the rain-speckled window. No umbrella, just his jacket zipped up, his hair damp, and that look, the one that made my chest feel like it was caving. And I didn't even wait for him to knock. I pulled the door open, and we just stood there, staring at each other, both of us breathing like we'd run miles. I stepped back to let him in. We didn't speak much at first. He just reached for my hand, his fingers warm despite the cold, and when I didn't pull away, he tugged me closer. My other hand found his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his shirt. It was grounding, yet electrifying, like touching something I'd been missing for years without realizing it. The world outside blurred into nothing. The rain, the wind, the late hour, none of it mattered. We moved slowly at first, learning the rhythm of each other, the way we breathed, the way we watched for signs of hesitation. He kissed me like he'd been holding it in for far too long. Like he didn't just want me, he needed me. It was the kind of kiss that silences every doubt, the kind that makes your skin buzz with heat. I melted into him, my fingers curling into his jacket before sliding up to his neck. His hands were gentle but sure, tracing the lines of my back as though memorizing them. There was no rush, no greed, only the deep, aching want of two people who had been starving for real connection. When we finally pulled away, my forehead rested against his, both of us breathing hard, as if words would break the spell we'd woven. "You make me forget everything else," I whispered. He closed his eyes for a moment, as though that confession landed somewhere deep. "Good," he murmured. "Let me." We stayed like that for hours, touching, talking, sharing the kinds of truths you don't give away easily. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, as though it was washing away the lines I'd been so desperate to keep between us. That night wasn't about betrayal in the cheap, careless sense. It was about finding something I hadn't realized I'd lost. Intimacy that didn't just live in the body, but in the soul.